Assalamu alaikum, hello and good afternoon. You are listening to Atiyah on the Mental Health and Emotional Wellbeing Show on Ramadan Radio Wolverhampton and online on ramadanradiowolves.com. In this show, we hope to provide information that may be helpful to support your well-being and the well-being of others, because everyone's mental health matters. You can listen back to this and previous shows on Ramadan Radio Wolves YouTube channel, alongside finding further mental health information on my X feed at Atiyah3. We are not here to offer you advice in place of your clinician. However, we will share information that may encourage you to seek support. If you feel you need to discuss your mental health and well-being following this show, then please contact your GP or mental health professional. You are very welcome to share your comments regarding the show via YouTube or Facebook. Our guest, Sattar, is an Islamic solution-focused therapist, currently training in cognitive behavioral therapy at the University of Reading. He has over 10 years of experience working in secondary mental health care and moving to talking therapies in 2021. Zan has taken part in NHS projects focused on providing inclusive services for Pakistani and Muslim communities. He's an active member of the community and has been involved in multiple projects since 2013, including fundraising, workshops, and iftar programs. As a part of a larger Eid festival project, Zan suggested the allocation of protected hours to facilitate and increase access for people who have special educational needs. Today, Zan will be sharing insight to the integration of Islamic psychology, solution-focused therapy, and cognitive behavioral therapy. Welcome to Ramadan Radio Wolves, Zan.
Assalamu alaikum, thank you for having me.
Walaikum assalam. Thanks for joining us. Firstly, could you tell us a little bit about yourself? What's brought you into mental health?
So I graduated in 2011 with a degree in criminology and psychology. So I had a little bit of interest there. And then when I left, a friend actually recommended secondary mental health care. I didn't know much about it, but I went in as a healthcare assistant for the first, I suppose, 4 years. And then after that, there was a activity coordinator job that came up. So around 10 years, so between 2011 and 2021, I was there, working with people with autism, forensic backgrounds, and sort of a variety of things. There was a lot of great experience, understanding how secondary mental health care works, kind of a bit about medication, approaches there, and things like that. I suppose towards the end, it got quite tough. I'm not going to lie. It was, I suppose, the clientele were quite difficult. There was a bit of violence that you get in secondary care, and sort of people becoming burnt out. So I wanted to sort of pursue a more primary care style of career, i.e. therapy. I suppose, interestingly enough, I actually didn't have a great view of psychology just because of my 10 years there and sort of interacting with clinical psychologists. But a good assistant psychologist sort of told me about a role called the psychological wellbeing practitioner, which is in NHS talking therapies. Alhamdulillah, I applied for that. I did the 1 year training. I also became a senior in that role as well.
Okay, tell us a little bit about that role. So the psychological wellbeing practitioner. Would you say that that's kind of very much frontline services? So in terms of the first port of call.
Yeah, so you may go to your GP and say I'm feeling low or anxious or something along those lines. And they would generally refer you to talking therapy. So it used to be called IAPT, it's kind of a longer name, but it's become talking therapies. So you're coming for an assessment. It might be 30 minutes, 40 minutes, 45 minutes, depending where you are around the country. And sort of depending what happens in that assessment, you'd come through for possibly a low intensity form of cognitive behavioral therapy. So whether it's working on depression, low mood, OCD, social anxiety, or things like that. In those talking therapies, you have, of course, one-to-one options, you have groups that run, you have online programs. So I have been running, NHS talking therapies has been running for quite a long time, well over sort of 15 years. And that's usually your first port of call, so your kind of primary approach to that. And then after that, if you need more support, you can go into something called high intensity, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit later.
Hmm.
which is a deeper level of cognitive behavior therapy if you're really struggling and you're a bit more severe with your symptoms. But it's usually a good step to go into first, and it's free as well, so you might as well utilize it if you're struggling.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So your interest in mental health came about from these experiences. You were talking
Mm.
about the psychological well-being practitioner. Do go on.
Yeah, so from there, I actually took a little bit of a break. I went part time just to pursue a couple of other things. And during being part time, I came across a Islamic skills counseling program run by the teacher's name, Sheikh Abdullah Hassan. He runs something called AIMS, which is Association of Islamic Mental Health Specialists. I took quite a keen interest. It seemed interesting. I had a look at the sort of brochure. And I went ahead, they had sort of funding in place as well to do that. So it was a lot cheaper to get onto the course back then. So I did a whole year of that. That's kind of based between obviously learning your Islamic principles, but looking at a solution focused approach. Um,
Hmm.
Once I had done that, I just actually started in September cognitive behavior therapy, a postgraduate, which is what we call high intensity in talking therapies, just to further my learning, really.
Okay, so that sounds like a very interesting journey, and actually, it seems as though you have thought about kind of the next step in terms of intervention
Mhm.
for people that you work with. What is it that you can do to better yourself to help clients at a deeper level is what I'm hearing you say. Um,
Yeah.
so, as you were doing that work, I mean, you said you've embarked onto the CBT course, and I'm guessing that obviously with your background in psychological well-being practitioner, in being one of those, you are well versed in some of the CBT techniques already. So I can imagine how you bring the two together to work with your clients. Could you tell us a little bit about solution-focused therapy? So, I
Yeah.
mean, how are you using that with the Islamic approach?
Yeah, so solution focused. So of course I hadn't heard of it before. So PWP was sort of CBT approached. This caught my eye because the sheikh said it's very similar to an Islamic framework. So I thought, oh, great, let's have a look. So solution focused therapy is an approach which is sort of enabling people to build a change in their lives, but in a very short period of time. So it's not about 20, 30, 40 sessions, but it's actually as fast as possible. And of course, in our lessons, the chef would say, this kind of mirrors Islam, where we don't want to focus too long on the negatives and sort of let that shaitan or waswasa come in, or let the depths of negativity take a seat in our heart, which can lead to, the heart becoming hard or us feeling ungrateful. Um, some just, a quick overview of solution focus is a couple of key aspects is one, it's to encourage people to describe their preferred future. So we do this through something called a miracle question, where the person imagines how their ideal day would be without anxiety, depression, or whatever they're going through. And it kind of details the skills and resources they've already maybe done before in the past. Um, and this kind of brings forward this idea of, okay, let's have a look at what you used to do and what you're not doing now, and how can we sort of fuse that together. It also looks at the language that you use. So just a really, I mean, it's not the best example, but where someone may say, oh, I will one day eat healthy, you may change that wording to today is day one of me eating healthy. So there's an immediate, almost a cognitive shift like that. Some of the frameworks behind it also, one of the founders, her name's Insu Kim Berg. She was sort of fond of the idea of the therapist ideally not leaving any footprints in the client's lives. I know other therapies have different models, but this one, it's about less what I would say as a therapist, but more about how the actual intervention of those interview questions help the client to figure out things themselves. So it's kind of focus on the solutions and not at the problems. And that's really what solution focus helps with, helping the client identify and build on solutions that they worked with in the past,
Mm.
or kind of in the future. And in terms of Islamic framework, again, it's just laid in really nicely. Not so he used to say, we're not doing an archaeological excavation into the past of someone, which I suppose is a bit opposite to CBT, but I can touch on that in a moment. So yeah, it's really sort of getting this idea of we don't want to delve too much on why this happened. We don't want to start questioning Allah's qadr or things like that. Actually, it's, well, how do I move forward?
Yeah.
If we think of the Prophet ﷺ and Ta'if, where he was sort of attacked because of he was going to do da'wah, he wasn't constantly thinking about that and Islam sort of regressing. It was still a progressive movement going forward. It's just that kind of very simple framework, which to me so far has worked, alhamdulillah, quite well.
Mhm. Okay, so I think it sounds very interesting, actually, that approach. And for a lot of people, I think sometimes they worry about speaking to therapists and having to talk about the past or
Mm.
having to talk about, in particular, what's going on for them, their experiences, like as you said, the negative things that are happening in their lives at the moment. So for those people, this sounds like an ideal therapy, wouldn't you think?
100%. I've had clients where we didn't actually really need to go that deep into what the problem was. That doesn't mean that there's no space for them to talk. It's just that I don't need to be over curious about, well, why did that happen? Where did it come from? Who affected you? How did you feel? We don't need to do that. A lot of it is, okay, so let's, how do you feel right now? So for example, there's an approach of scaling questions. So we might ask someone, I don't know, on a scale of 0 to 10, how anxious do you feel? So they might say 7 out of 10, so 10 being super anxious. Okay, so why did you not, say 8? And they think about, well, these are some of the reasons why I'm not anxious. And then you start building from there. A sort of a scaffolding approach. So the house is kind of, it's them. We're just building around um, what they have done so far, just to continue building their strengths instead of reminding them, well, why was it bad? Why did you feel like this? And so far on this, like I said, it's been a very fruitful approach with the majority of people who used it.
Thank you for sharing that. So you've told us a little bit about kind of what put you into mental health, and you shared what you went on to study around Islamic. Was it called Islamic solution focused therapy? What was the therapy? What was it called? The
Yeah,
training?
yeah. Officially, it was Islamic Counseling Skills Program, infused with
Mhm.
solution focused. Yeah.
Perfect. Could you tell us a little bit about CBT, and then we'll have a little think about how you bring it all together? Does that make sense?
Yeah, so CBT, I suppose there's just a bit of background. Its main founder was sort of Aaron Beck in the 60s or 70s, and ideally it was an approach against psychodynamic therapy. And he sort of fused this. There was a differentiation back then between a cognitive approach or a behavioral approach, and he thought, right, this needs to come together. So it's CBT is really focusing on the relation between your thoughts, your behaviors, your sort of feelings, emotions, and
Hmm.
maybe your physical symptoms that you may have, whilst looking at what is the overall trigger of a situation. It's one of the main approaches used within NHS talking therapies. It is quite well evidence based. There's a lot of research, and that's usually what you would um, get into in talking therapies if you were to come through an assessment.
Hmm.
And it looks at a variety of things, like it might identify, say, negative thought patterns. So you might have what we call a cognitive distortion, which basically is things like, are you a black and white thinker? Do you overgeneralize or things like that? So it helps you to expand your thinking base. So it's not a one way only sort of approach. If we think about things like depression, maybe it's something called behavioral activation. So it's engaging in positive behaviors whilst understanding the maintenance cycle that is keeping you in that place. And for other things, again, anxiety, phobias, we can look at exposure therapy or something called behavioral experiments, which is essentially where you kind of put on the science jacket and you put an experiment out as to think, well, I believe this is true, but let me go test the theory. Depending on the outcome of that, it will update you sort of mentally to say, okay, well, that wasn't true. Therefore, I shouldn't be feeling as anxious. And you continue doing this. So it's a very interesting approach, very, very well researched. And again, with the work in the NHS, it's helped a lot of people.
Yeah, and it's recommended by the NICE guidelines as a
Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so you've shared information there on CBT, and you've talked a little bit about Islamic solution focused work. I'm wondering kind of what common mental health disorders these approaches integratively would work with.
Yeah, so I suppose the way I explained it, it probably seems a bit opposite to each other. One's looking at the past and one's sort of going forward, essentially, I always give it to the client. I always ask them, how do you want to work? So in the therapy room, the client is obviously the expert in their experience of what's happening and how they would like to approach it. And I'm just bringing an approach from the therapy side just to see what works best, kind of like a Rubik's Cube. You kind of turn it around a few times just to ensure you're both on the same page. So with CBT, of course, it works with depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, and those sort of things. Solution focused therapy does the same. It also has relationship support. So you can work with couples, kind of do couples counseling or individual counseling regarding relationships, which is good. I think they both have a valid place in therapy. But if I was to think slightly more of Islamic values, then I'd probably swing more towards solution focus. But I found that clients do want to talk about their past, and you don't want to shut them down, of course. It's just allowing them that space to know what's going on, and you sort of link it with the goals that they may bring, or help them formulate a goal, and then sort of present. Well, CBT would help you with X, Y, Z. A solution focused approach which help you in this direction, and you take it forward. But there's been a few times where I've infused the two, and they've worked quite well. They haven't sort of cancelled each other out. So far, it seems to be going quite well.
Yeah, it sounds very interesting, and I like the fact that you say that you can bring the two together in terms of understanding the person that you're working with,
Mm.
and where they want to go with therapy, and one allows you to kind of unpick and understand what's happening in the here and now, where the trap is. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then allowing them to think about solution focused goals. I'm thinking, um, okay, so you've shared a bit about how what it works for solution focused therapy with CBT. I'm wondering now more specifically if we're thinking about working within the Pakistani communities, and you've shared with me that they are the communities that you work with, or have worked with, or experience of working with primarily. Um, I'm wondering about any patterns that you might have noticed or identified.
Mm.
So, working with the Pakistani and Muslim communities, and I know the two can be very separate culturally, but at the same time, there's some overlap.
Yeah, I mean, so just to split it slightly within the work in the NHS, I'm part of
Mm,
we'll call it a work stream. So my sort of main focus was to engage with the local Pakistani Muslim population, and to kind of get them into some sort of access. So NHS have targets. I mean, I find that term kind of, hard to access, a little bit problematic, in terms of, I don't think the community is hard to access. I just think maybe the platform may not be quite right for them to access. But at least in NHS, I found a lot of it is, I suppose, quote unquote, general depression, or anxiety. A lot of it depends on who maybe that person is speaking to, on the phone, if they feel comfortable to open up with people. And of course, if people aren't maybe Muslim or culturally Pakistani, I found that people have found that quite difficult to maybe get their point across,
mm,
because it's not quite making sense. In the NHS, we're just sort of working on those things. How do I engage with the community? So I've gone to the local masjid. So where I work is different to where I live. Spoke to the imam and said, look, how can we bridge this? And, he said to me, if you can explain to me how that type of therapy works and it's not going against Islam, then I will fully commit with you and let the whole community know that, yes, you have the support. So that kind of work, inshallah, should be quite fruitful going forward. In the more private space that I've been providing therapy, which is sort of more the solution focused side, I've actually found that marital difficulties have probably been number one. Um, I'm sort of careful how I share any sort of things for clients, but there's
mm,
been examples of sisters who are their wives, but they've been beaten by their husband. There've been sisters who have caught their husbands cheating. There was a brother who sort of felt his wife was not as practicing as he was, and that was causing a rupture. So I found that quite difficult to navigate with the clients because there's a lot of emotion, there's a lot of things going on. Of course, the in-laws, I'm sure many people come across that, especially in the Pakistani background, of how you kind of balance, especially as a male. I think I've had some people have said, look, I need to balance between the rights of my mother, but also my wife. How do I do that? And the kind of culture aspect is, excuse me, is to help your family as much as possible. So these
mm,
things that have come through quite a bit. there has been some anxiety, some sort of OCD as well. OCD seems to be quite common with men, I found, especially with like wudu, purification, and things like that. So it's in the private space, it's been that, whereas in the NHS, it's been a bit more, I suppose, wide in terms of
Yeah.
things.
Um, so these issues that have arose in the community, you said that you've been able to have some conversations with the local imam, and it seems to be progressing well. So there seems to be kind of understanding of what your offer is, and
Mm,
that perhaps it doesn't impact too much on the religious requirements. Um, Talking about imams, have you ever come across people who have said that, you know, there's no reason for depression or anxiety, and that they should seek support from an imam, or they should pray more? Have you ever had that kind of uh, experience?
yeah, so I have to say, alhamdulillah, personally, I haven't. But that doesn't mean it doesn't exist. And it doesn't mean that I haven't spoken to people who have gone to their imam and they just sort of said, just pray, just pray. And I think, you know, at least from that Islamic framework, we can argue that, once you have, say, a good or high level of, say, tawakkul and iman, in theory, depression should be minimized and reduced. But the key question in between is, how do you get to that level in the first place? And I think this is where a collaborative approach is really important between a therapist, whether it's me or someone else, and an imam. So the imam will, of course, help with the Islamic side and the kind of Sharia aspects and all the rulings. Whereas my job or any therapist job is at least to help navigate those kind of day-to-day difficulties, help the clients find those inner strengths and kind of work towards those goals and solutions. I think the other thing that starts to create a bit of confusion is probably the kind of Western approach in psychology. It's
Mhm.
very, very I, very me. It doesn't really look at spiritual awareness and things like that. If we think about the ayah, rarely in the realms of Allah do hearts find rest. I'm sure we've all seen this, over the years. The heart is such a key component for the Muslim, but this is often missing from sort of Western therapy.
Mhm.
So the importance of having a Muslim therapist is important, but also the imam to be understanding and involved. So maybe taking a step back is quite important. Instead of having the client in the middle arguing between the imam and the therapist actually should sit with the imam and say, hey, look, let's have an understanding between each other. So going back to where I studied the Islamic psychology, the whole point of AIMS, the Association of Islamic Mental Health Specialists, is you have imams. So I'm not an imam myself, but you have imams there who are trained to be counselors. You have counselors there who have supervisors who will be imams as well. You have this fusion. Me, myself personally, I've got imams or some of my old teachers who I said, look, I'm doing this, but I'm not an imam. I need your support. Can I have kind of supervision with you from a spiritual aspect? So I think imams that say this, I just think it's a case of education. I don't want to knock what they do. Obviously, they have a lot of difficulties kind of
Yeah.
carrying the ummah in a different way,
Hmm.
but there has to be an understanding that you can't just say to someone, just go pray. Although we understand the prayer is the key to
Sure.
sort of softening how people feel, understanding qadr and navigating their difficulties. But that bridge in between, I think that's where the therapist's important role can be. And it might just be a short space just to help with what's happening, and then they can continue, going to the imam for other things. And in terms of those who say there is no depression or anxiety,
Yeah.
um, I mean, Yaqub
Shall
alayhi
we pick
salam,
up? Sorry, Zan. Shall we pick up on this after the break, if that's okay? We'll
sure,
have a
yeah, that's
short
fine.
break and we'll pick up from where we've left. Thank you for tuning in. Assalamu alaikum and welcome back. You're listening to Ramadan Radio Wolves at the Ali with a mental health and emotional well-being show. And we have with us Zan Sattar. And we were speaking before the break about kind of that fine balance of religion and mental health, and understanding mental health from the general perspective. And Zan was giving us some advice around that, Zan. So are you okay to pick up from where you've left?
Yeah, yeah, thank you. So I was just sort of saying that people who say there's no depression, anxiety, or it's not real, or those sort of things. We can look at an example of Yaqub alayhi salam, where he wept for his son Yusuf. He wept, he lost his eyesight. You can think of the distress of Aisha radiallahu anha, when people were slandering her, telling lies about her. She sort of wept and said, "I thought that the grief would tear me apart." So there it is there. But their response, of course, was to go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala immediately. Your du'as kind of indicate that. So the fusion is there. I think it's the vehicle in between that just needs to be addressed of how do we help people who are really, really struggling? How do you kind of nurture the soul, especially living in kind of concrete jungles that we do. We're not connected with nature. There was a study about, atheism is higher within concrete jungles versus those who live out in more rural areas. So these things we need to really take into consideration because it's not just, the Imam says something or someone is really struggling. There's a whole holistic approach. And I think Islam does tackle that. Fusing that with therapy, I think is really important. I did argue in a nice way with my teacher to say that, look, I really think it's for this Islamic psychology to really set off. We need a framework, a bit like how you have fiqh within the madahibs. You want the same kind of element with Islam. I know there's other institutions out there that do have some sort of framework, but I said, where's the overarching body that
Mhm.
someone can go to and say, hey, well, what is the approach to this? So yeah, I think there's a lot of, inshallah, it's moving forward. I've seen a lot of things on LinkedIn and social media where people are trying to propel Islamic psychology or however you want to phrase it again. But it's still quite a few steps to go.
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from in terms of that, Zan. There is more kind of bodies that can have a look at an overarching understanding of Islam that can, provide supervision, etc.
Mm.
That's required. Can you share examples of when solution focused therapy has helped with, let's say, anxiety? Because we seem to be hearing a lot of people are experiencing depression and anxiety, but I wanted to focus more so on anxiety today, if that was okay.
Yeah, so ironically, I haven't had too many people come for anxiety in terms of solution focus, but I'll cover both solution focus and
Okay.
CBT, and then
Yeah.
so in terms of sort of solution focus, I had a few university students who were struggling with exams. They failed. Someone I think they failed one. This kind of really strong worry of if I don't pass, I'm not going to have a job, or my parents won't be happy, and these things which are quite common. In terms of solution focused therapy, which is quite a very question based approach, and it's quite a difficult therapy. And when I say difficult, it's because there's a lot of questions that get thrown out, and you really have to think about what you're doing, what you've done, how you can go forward. So just asking, some of these guys, what worked well for you in the past? What were you doing then that you aren't doing now? What was your routine? They might talk about salah or things like that. And if they're not praying now, why is that? What's changed? If you were studying better in year one, for example, what's the difference? So this starts to help some of these guys recognize what's going on. We also use something called VIP questions. This is very important people. So the mum and dad, you can ask them, what would they say about how you're coping right now or how you did back then? And then the miracle question. So I did mention it earlier. So the miracle question is basically to ask, um, if you were to wake up and your anxiety had completely disappeared, what does your day look like? And with the client, you take them through a very detailed approach. How do you feel when you wake up in the morning? What's the first thing you noticed? Who do you speak to? If you're having breakfast, what did you prepare? How did you feel when you went to university? And you really take them through that whole process where they start to recognize the changes that they need to make or should be making for themselves, which is different to what they're doing at the moment. So
Mhm.
SFBT is really, really good in that circumstance. I think some of the people I've spoken to, they found it very beneficial and they start understanding what their goals need to be. Do I need to have, I don't know, sticky notes around to help me? Do I need timers to help me? Do I need these sort of things to help me? So that helped quite well. If I come into CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy, anxiety is, it talks a lot about intolerance of uncertainty. So, people cannot understand that it's okay for things not to be known 100% when people start to search for that. So if we take an example of someone going on holiday, maybe they would Google, they would ask people, they would search 100 times. They might look at the airplane specs, what's the safety regulations, what's the currency abroad, what's the health, how close is my hotel to a hospital. It goes on and on and on because they need certainty everywhere. I like the example of, hay fever tablets. You have an intolerance to pollen. So you have that hay fever tablet and it gives you some level of tolerance to go there. CBT will do the same thing. It will allow that widening of perspective and cognitions for you to hopefully, relax a little bit with the anxiety and think, okay, well, I can't control everything. What is normal in terms of control with my anxiety, and what do I need to let go of? And if we come back to Islam, of course, um, we have to trust Allah, have tawakkul on Allah, Tayo Kamla, have tawakkul on Allah. So infusing that as well, because you can have Islamic approach to CBT as well, to kind of infuse that. So anxiety is a very big thing. I know people in my family have got anxiety, and it's very difficult for them to function at times, but it's just coming back with some of those concepts to get them through, whichever they prefer, to help them.
Sure. Thank you for sharing that. And Zan, it sounds as though you provide a safe space for people to bring their anxieties into. So for those people who have been perhaps for decades, years, stuck in a cycle where they've been thinking about thinking about feeling worried and scared about, let's say, leaving the front door, or worried about general things like, will I get the cooking done on time, or will I pick the children up on time, and just overthinking a lot of things,
Mm-hmm.
which can become worse, so it can become perpetuating worse. But it sounds as though you provide a safe space for them to bring that into. So if they've had a decades of thinking like this, they would be then worried about feeling better, because what does the other side look like? So it seems that you allow that space for them to explore that.
Yeah, 100%. I think allowing the space is so important. Just a human as a fellow Muslim, instead of people who might struggle with praying and they've got anxiety about telling anyone, the last thing they probably want to hear and need to hear is, "Oh, you're bad. You're gonna you're gonna be punished." I mean, we need to bring them back in and support them through the difficulty that they're going through. Also, I suppose what's interesting, if we're talking about safe spaces, as I don't feel there's many male Muslim therapists. I know they do exist,
Mhm.
but there's not a high amount. I've seen not many. And when I have very general conversations with people in the public, or if I just end up talking to people and they kind of ask what your profession is, I mean, the first thing is, "Wow, is that what you do?" But all of a sudden, the men will just open up. "Oh yeah, I've had a bit of trouble with this before." And I've actually found it really interesting, because if you think about what institutions and maybe even NHS say, that we're hard to reach or access is really difficult, and they're actually, no, I think it's just that kind of level of, who do they feel safe with? How do you tackle that? Opposite to what I'm saying, although I have found some difficulties, as Muslims sometimes find it difficult to open up to other Muslims, because of this shame and guilt of people in the community knowing,
Mhm.
and things like that, which is quite a shame. And the way I've tackled it, especially in the NHS, I've had people that I've spoken to, when we ask about suicidal thoughts, they pause. And I know that pause means there's something there. And my first caveat is, look, I'm not related to you. I'm not from your community, but also I could never, apart from confidentiality, but just as an amana, you could never go and start talking about things. Of course, unless there's immediate danger. I mean, outside of safeguarding. So providing that safe space is so important to
Yeah,
allow that
and
person to feel
reducing the
like,
guilt and
yeah,
around that, in terms of having those thoughts. It's very natural for people who are feeling severely depressed or anxious, or
yeah,
having mental health problems, to have those thoughts. So, yeah, bringing that into the room, and making them feel comfortable to speak about this is really important,
mhm,
from what you're sharing. I'm going to go on to thinking about depression, if that's okay. So you
mhm,
might find
yeah,
some people who experience depression and are unable to do things they could do when they were well. So, for example, we've talked a little bit about prayer and salah. Um, how could they be supported in this? So I'm thinking more around CBT and how CBT could support you from that lens. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I sort of bouncing off the whole, you don't want to. First, you don't guilt trip them and sort of things like that. But in terms of especially a CBT approach, depression has this sort of cycle of, feeling low. I don't want to do anything, and if I try and engage in things I used to, I'm going to feel really lethargic, fatigued. Therefore, let me just not put effort in that, and then you end up in this really bad spiral of essentially staying at home or in bed or just being super inactive. And I like this phrase, motion changes emotion. So whilst depression can make you feel quite heavy and leading to inactivity, you kind of have to force yourself through doing things which are actionable or things that you used to do to start to come out of this. So you don't want the emotion to dictate what you're doing. It's actually the action that needs to happen first, and then the motivation and everything else would follow. So with salah and kind of depression, it's kind of a case of you need to find a way to force yourself or have someone to encourage you to start praying. Now, it might be, let me start with the fard, let me start at home. You might think, well, let me go to the masjid because there's that kind of community bonding that occurs. Someone might say, hey, let me pick you up. I'll let's go to the masjid together. I think also when it comes to salah, you want to use it in a way where, you are connecting with Allah and disconnecting from the world. And actually that's where you can pour your heart out. And that's where you can, say, I feel like this and use the du'as that we have. And, again, going back to the ayah that I mentioned before, in the remembrance of Allah, do hearts find rest. Your heart needs to feel at ease, and depression will eat away at all of that. So CBT has this, it's called behavioral activation. So it's trying to put in activities in a schedule for you that works for you. So you can use a planner Monday to Friday or Monday to Sunday, whatever works. And you can split it in a way where it could be AM to PM or, hourly, whatever works for you. And just put in slots of, 15 minutes salah here, 15 minutes salah there. And what I also would argue actually is even if you don't pray in that moment because you're feeling so rough, or really low, still have that section grayed out, still have your, salah mat on the floor and just sit there, because slowly your brain is going to start to associate, well, this is my time to pray salah. The mat is there. My environment is encouraging me to pray, have some Quran on or some oud or something just to get that whole feeling going. That will eventually get you into a notion of, okay, I need to start praying. Let me at least pray my, 4 fard for dhuhr as an example. So these small steps will help. And those small steps are what leads to bigger changes over time.
Thank you. And you've touched upon there how actually salah can support your mental health and well-being. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so I suppose a few things, it kind of acts as that natural stress reliever. You're shifting your focus from the worries to actually Allah, and this really helps. And also I had a few clients who were struggling with this, and I can't remember which sheikh I heard it from, but he said, say this to Allah, say, Allah, I'm delegating all my problems to you because you are the one that will help and you understand everything. Please take this from me and aid me. And I told one of the clients that, and he said when he said that, he had such a burden sort of lifted off his shoulders just by that slight change in how you say that. So that's one thing. I don't like the word mindfulness with salah, the way it's kind of looked in the Western sphere, but just for the purpose, we can say it has a level of mindfulness, the recitation, the movements, the breathing in salah. You're kind of feeling that you're in front of Allah and you are praying to Him, and you know why you're doing that. It gives you a sense of purpose and hope. There's a reason why we pray, and then also, of course, strengthening resilience and patience and things like that.
Yeah, and I suppose I know what you mean in terms of that difficulty around mindfulness and associating that with salah, because it's a very active and connecting act. However, at the same time, there are certain parts of the prayer that we don't really connect with fully. So the sajda, or etc., or the prostration, holding, clasping your hands on your chest, etc. So would that be probably the mindfulness part, bringing your mind to it more? Do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at salah, I mean, you're at the lowest state a human could be. Your forehead is on the ground. You are fully submitting, and I think when you connect properly with that, it will help. We're living in a world where it's instant gratification. Everything is quick, fast. We don't give sort of what each part of the salah should have. If you actually try that, let's quote unquote, in a mindful way, I think your connection with salah and Allah will be far, far greater. And I'd probably encourage people to try at least one tahajjud, at least one. I mean, at the moment it's quite easy, the kind of schedule, but at least one, and kind of just pour everything out into the sujood and just to see how you feel.
Hmm, thank you for that. Zan, from your earlier conversation around male therapists and female Muslim therapists, and the lack of male therapists, and that conversation around some people would prefer to speak to the opposite gender, perhaps from the same faith,
Mm.
and vice versa. Um, I think you're right. Encouraging young men to come into psychology is important, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if we look at, I mean, some people might think, oh, I don't want to do Western psychology. I mean, Western psychology, a lot of it came from Eastern practices anyway. Al-Razi and Tabari and all these sort of famous scholars from back then, they had written about depression and anxiety, and we had Bimaristans, which were full mental health hospitals. So we have this structure already, and we've obviously lost a lot of it, and then psychology was, I don't want to say hijacked, but things were infused and things that happened. So I feel like you would need to have that understanding of psychology and then to start thinking about an Islamic framework and how does that work. Again, I'm an ambassador for AIMS, so I'm trying to, with the help of Sheikh, to say, what can I do to support anybody, the masjid, whoever it is, and how do we get that kind of mutual understanding. You don't want
Yeah.
a full Western model with a sprinkling of Islam. I think that would be disservice to Islam, because if that approach falls apart, you could almost argue, well, did Islam fall apart in that moment? And we don't want to sort of fall in that either. So I think it's really important, and especially brothers need to come into this field because there just isn't enough.
Absolutely. And that grassroots connection is really important, and opening dialogue around mental health
Yeah,
is important at all levels, right?
yeah. I think like in my area, as an example, I'm going to reach out to a lot of the Muslims and say, look, I'm here as a service. How can we sort of, I say, mutually benefit? But I want to provide a service. What can the masjid do to help this process? Do you need a presentation? Like I've done one talk in the masjid already. I've got another one, I think next month. So any small things that I can do, we can do it. Obviously, we need to break that taboo as well. Like, oh, I'm attending a mental health talk. I don't want people to think I'm crazy. You're not crazy. You're coming for support. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with that. So yeah, grassroots is very important.
The taboo, the stigma is we're hoping with this well-being show and with people like yourself that we can kind of break through those ceilings and try and support people. Um, the I was thinking a little bit about kind of in the here and now, and thinking
Mhm.
about, let's say, people who have access to therapy yet, and they're sat at home, they're listening to the show, and they're thinking, how can we support our loved ones to kind of set some goals because we're finding that they're struggling. I'm thinking about kind of um, their first kind of motivating words. What would you suggest?
Yeah, I think a short overview would be to, I mean, the family is the support. So remove the judgment. And then, if it's a brother to a brother or a mother to a daughter or something, just to say, look, what is it that you need? What are you struggling with? And help formulate that goal and also make it quite smart. So SMART just really quickly stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely. Basically, how focused can that goal be just to make something, you can I tick it off to say I've done that. Helping that, keeping them accountable, checking in, I don't know, weekly, monthly, whatever works in terms of the goals, and saying, what do you need to help get to that goal? If you want to be healthy, do you need a gym pass? Should I find a gym for you, or do you need to do it? And things like that. So a family can help a lot. It's you have to work with the individual, and they have to be at the center of it.
Okay. Thank you for that. Now, just thinking about more generally and noticing that actually for a lot of people in the Muslim communities and perhaps wider, current mental health difficulties have been impacted by what we see on the news, the atrocities, the suppression of voices, and it triggers kind of mistrust, perhaps in
Mm.
our leaders, and it fuels stress. Um, how do we sit with this and continue, and how do we prevent anxiety and distress from impacting a person's daily life?
Yeah, I mean, look, even in myself, I'm struggling with the same thing, considering everything that's going on in the news, and it's not easy at all. For me, there was one cognitive shift that happened, so a thought shift for me, because I had access to information, and just really quickly, there was a sheikh, his name is Sheikh Ali Hamuda, he's a brilliant speaker, and he's Palestinian as well. He spoke about what's happening in Gaza, and he narrated about the hadith of martyrs and their kind of how they will be seen in Jannah and the afterlife. And when I listened to that, I understood that to attain that level, you have to go through those difficulties now. And this is what he was trying to get to. So how do you attain the higher level of Jannah? The purification, there's how life is a trial and test. So that helped me feel slightly different. I mean, watching it is not easy at all, but it gave me that sense of hope. And I think hope is mentioned in the Quran so many times. So that's the first part. Connecting with a speaker, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever it is that you can do to help give that slight change. The other thing is, how active are you in supporting whatever is going on in terms of oppression? So have you engaged with MPs, regardless of if it's fruitless, there still needs to be that knocking on the door. The other thing I would also argue really quick is if you have a unique skill that will help with any kind of information, you should really use that in this moment. Are you a graphic designer? Can you make interesting infographics for people to quickly absorb? Are you a historian? Can you give us background? Are you a teacher? Can you kind of get this information out? Are you a therapist? Can you help people who are struggling with any of the anxiety or depression? So, we don't want to be overrun, but I think these are some of the things that should help, at least for now.
Thank you, Zan. That's very interesting. And I think what you said there, that people having access to watching things on their feeds, etc., I'm wondering whether it'd be helpful to also kind of reduce some of that. So we know what's going on. We cannot change it. But sometimes to protect your own mental health for short periods of time, perhaps allocate certain times of looking at social media. Would you say that would be helpful also?
Yeah, 100%. I took a 2-week break myself. I just needed a reset. So don't feel upset that you need to do that, but do that. Look after yourself first.
Absolutely. We have a couple of minutes left, and just wanted to kind of think about ending Ramadan in a positive way. And do you have any tips for our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, last few days of Ramadan, Ibn Taymiyyah's quote is very famous. What really matters are good endings and not flawed beginnings. So don't worry if your Ramadan wasn't great at the beginning. Your last few days, last few hours, just do as much as you can. Make a sincere intention and just do as much as you're able to, and make sure your ending is stronger than your beginning. And that will hopefully, help with any feeling of, I didn't do enough. Just do as much as you can within your scope.
Brilliant. So don't stop and continue and then take it to the other side, because that's what Ramadan is about, right? That refreshing.
Exactly.
Zan, it's been a pleasure having you on the show today. We've learned a lot from you, and I think some of the things I would be taking away is around the Association of Islamic Muslim Specialists, and thinking about changing motion. Emotion changes emotion. That's what you said,
Emotion.
right? Motion
Yeah.
changes emotion. So more movement, it will help you change emotion. Thank you very much. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, how could they do that?
So zan.talkingtherapy@gmail.com, or my Instagram is the talking.therapist.
Perfect. Thank you for being on the show today. Thank you to all of our listeners who have listened this year. I hope you have a good final few days of Ramadan, and Eid Mubarak to you. We hope to join you with more guests next Ramadan. Keep listening in and providing your feedback. Jazakallah.